graphic trait is the breath. Derrida's affirmation description in the chapter, past part 2. I attempt to decrypt or unseal a singular contract, the one that can link the phonic trait to the so-called graphic trait, even prior to the existence of the word, that is, GL or TR or plus R. It's applicable to his commentaries on the drawing it, figure 1. In gloss, the text immediately following the excerpt reads, Harvest of winded breaths, the other, sent by God, his name was John, had come to say, in the beginning was the word. The latter presents himself in order to sound the gloss of breath, to cut, reap, glean all expirations, to bind them afterwards in the midst of a song, in a bouquet, in a sheaf. Sheaf is always said of what let itself be cut. This excerpt from gloss refers to a quote from the passage in the Bible. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Derrida's attempt to graft from the phonic trait to the visual trait. He's trying to figure out how to connect textual trait to the visual trait, which is something not easy to do, but as we see that Derrida trying to do something like a philosophical discourse in the field. Like we say, field philosophy. And he's trying to apply philosophy to a more practical and a less abstract area in discourse. Obviously, he was never a trained artist. He's trying to do the way how an artist would do things. It raises a few questions. Does anybody want to become an artist or to make art? So when can? The next thing is the word. So we all know that from Bible. Word is the breath. Breath is from God. Or breath is God. We all learned from Lagore. That's not something new in the entire Western, especially Western European language. The word ties into breath. Breath ties into God. We have talked about this so many times when you read the Bible. You never heard God said, I wrote you a note, go read it. God always said, listen to my words, right? He never say, go read the scripture. I already wrote it out for you. He always says, I told you, I said so. So why? Because it's all about oral, speaking, speech, the phonetics. The sound ties into the voice. The voice ties into the breath. The breath ties into God. So everything goes that way. But here's another issue. It's not just a word as the Hebrew Christian tradition that it gives us this, you might want to say, entrampment. But then if you look at the Greek things, Derrida is interested in, or rather spend time in the idea of logocentrism, or the logos. So what is logos? Logos is a word too. So however that happened there, we needed to do more reading. From logos to word, is there a connection? That's not something easy to say, but they're parallel. Logos, it's also about the phonetic voice, at least according to Derrida. So that's why it ties into logocentrism with phonocentrism. So if logos does not tie into phonetic, does not tie into sound, then why Derrida wants to say logocentrism combined with phonocentrism? In fact, in his view, these two things, as one thing, two sides, you cannot separate those. So what does that tell you? It's all about the word, but the sound. The sound is the word is the logos. So in that way, now we kind of have a smooth transition there. So from the Greek all the way to the Roman, from Roman to Christian, what it were given previously, the information or the knowledge is that the Romans had to battle so much and then convert themselves into Christians, which I think we need to do some digging there. Is that true or not? We don't really know. But if you look at it from the view of logocentrism, and there's no issue there, from logocentrism to Christianity, there is a smooth transition there. It's all about the sound, it's all about the word, it's all about the breath.
As Derrida affirms, letters which have no meaning by themselves signify only the elementary phonic signifiers that make sense only when they are put together according to certain rules. Derrida's analysis of alphabetic letters as the elementary phonic signifier is further expanded as he comments on the equivalence of TR in language and trait line in Adami's drawing. To transpose, in other words, to betray the function or the phrase of the trait in Adami. When he operates by line, let GL drop, treat with TR. Let drawing, equal TR.
When you write something, you need to do much broader research beyond the main text. You can't just stick on the text and then stick on your class notes trying to write something. You're never going to be able to do that. You have to go beyond, particularly to find out that Adami and Derrida actually were friends. That explains a lot of things. And also what Adami articulated about his intention, that what he wanted to achieve, which is also very important. There are criticisms why Derrida writes about this guy. His painting so boring. Could Derrida write somebody more famous? It's not always a good thing to write somebody famous. There is a particular forbiddenness there, because when you write somebody famous, already you show people that you want to take a free ride. Of course, it's not always like that, but that accusation is always there, regardless. Since there are so many people writing about the famous guy, whoever that is, unless you can come up with something really good, you'd be smart just to back off. Just the common sense. Not only Derrida and Adami were friends, but also they seem to understand each other's work. I think that's the foundation, and they became friends. Decide to write about Adami's painting because, in a sense, this kind of joint work can deepen both their works. The next point, which is very important, is that Adami says, obviously, I am a painter of representation, and every figure you see is a figure with a symbolic background. That is a very tricky statement, because if you look at the idea of a representation, then you look at his painting. Obviously, his painting is not too close to the traditional understanding of what a representation is. And there is embedded element that I think both Adami and Derrida probably understood or agreed that Adami's painting, in the way he did, was a deconstruction of representation. Indeed, he was deconstructing representation. The initial two letters as something as a starter to the trait, visual trait, lines, points, and brush strokes. But what beyond that is why these two things could work together. Why Derrida's writing and Adami's painting as if they work seamlessly is because of the abstract element here. If we're going to talk about shapes, lines, and dots, we need to have a background. You can't talk about something without anything. And you always need a reference. So what the best reference is? The Chinese paintings. Because the Chinese painting from the very beginning formed by lines, dots. Of course, you may argue Greeks did the same thing. Yes, Greeks did. If you look at the Greek drawings on the pottery, and you look at the Chinese drawings on the bricks and tomb walls, and later on the silk paper, whatever, you may think there are some similarities, because you really can find some of the Chinese line paintings very similar to the Greek pottery drawings or paintings. However, you immediately to see the difference. But then immediately you also think, well, that's the style, that's a different cultural influence. Yes, that's true. But now what is this particular influence there? The influence is that the Western paintings or drawings never put the meaning into the line, the dots themselves, until the modern time. And the Chinese, on the contrary, they put the meanings into the line and dots almost from the beginning. What if I say started the Han Dynasty and the Tang Dynasty becomes very clear, all the Chinese art theories, particularly the painting treatise, always talk about what kind of line, how do you do a line, what does that mean, what that represents energetic-wise. We all know that, the calligraphy, the Chinese of calligraphy, what's so big a deal about that? People don't even think, well, it's not even important to read what the calligraphy says, rather than I just want to look at the lines. You look at the calligraphies. You think as Americans, I can't read that thing, particularly the running style. Well, you're not alone. You could talk to the Chinese, see how many of them can read. You're lucky you find a one person in every 10,000 people. So you don't have to feel bad about that. But you could appreciate the energetic flow, the symbolic meaning in the lines. There is no cultural boundary in that. The only cultural boundary is you block yourself into your own understanding of the world, and then you wouldn't be able to understand. As long as you open yourself, there's nothing you can't understand. You may see there's a very typical, outstanding phenomenon among the Western scholars. They can tell you everything about the Chinese painting and calligraphy, but they don't know anything about it. That's the interesting part. What they do, they're like the museum docents. They read all the textbook, they memorize them, they tell you what they are. But we had an experience when she first came to us, and I showed her two sets of calligraphy books. One's by Huai Su, one's by Zhang Xu. They're all running style. It's the tablets, stone tablets written, and they're very much close to our original. And so I asked her, what do you think about this? She said, well, this guy looks like he's always drunk and very emotional, but this guy looks more meditative, more self-content. Look, I did not tell anything about those. So she could tell the difference between the Taoist guy, we always say that, versus the Buddhist guy. And think about it, she said she never had Chinese food, right, before that. Yeah. So she never went to Chinese restaurant in Sacramento, and she was 24. What do you think? You think she was exposed to Asian culture? I don't think so. So where did that deep resonance, where did that come from? Obviously, there's something about a human. Once we unblock ourselves, we can feel, we can see, because we're all humans. There's a cultural boundaries. It's something we set up for ourselves. It's not naturally there by the God or by natural occurrence. No, we set up this for ourselves. That is to say, as humans, we, in general, we're very prejudiced. No matter how much you claim yourself liberal, does not make any difference. So here, back to the point here is that the difference between the Chinese lines and dots and the Greek line and dots is that the Chinese dots and the lines contain definition and meanings, whereas the Greek lines and dots are abstract. However, this abstraction being ignored or being masked for almost over 2,000 years until the most recent time when the abstract art occurred in somewhere in the late 1800s. Then people begin to pay attention to the line and dots. Typically we say Kandinsky, and of course there are a whole bunch. And here we're talking about Adami. It's in the same view. So the difference here is the lines and dots are abstract. With Adami's drawings and paintings, the line and dots are abstract. And to a point, to enrich his language, his artistic expression, he adds color in that, and the colors become abstract. So with this idea, and if the painting elements, the points, the lines, shapes, and the colors all become abstract on their own, each part is a different abstraction. Then if you compare that with the phonetic language, because the phonetic language, the phonetic alphabetic letters, they're abstract. They have no meaning. We all know that. It's the meaning we give to it, but as the letter itself, there's no meaning. So when you say TR, basically, you're not looking at the TR as a sign. You're looking at a TR, how TR pronounced. That's what you're looking at. So, of course, in English, we say trace, train, but in French, they don't say it as we do, but it's all the same. We say train, they say train. But that's not the point. The point is to the French, to English, TR are abstractions until we give them meaning. It's all about how we define meaning. We give meaning to things. That's just like Gumbush mentioned in his essay we just read that. It's all about how we give the meaning to things, how we define, how we force our own meaning into things. That's the whole thing. Essentially, Derrida is doing the same thing. It's going much deeper to explore the territory in which how do we give meaning to things from two different spheres. That is, we have the same situation, the phonetic trait versus the visual trait. That's what we were dealing here. But of course, this ties into Derrida's fundamental ambition to deconstruct logocentrism and phonocentrism. This is a small piece of his big pie.